Welcome to another episode of At Home with Cathy. This season we are focused on Project Renew, which is a fundraising project for Chrysalis House, the Women and Children's Center in our area. What we're doing is we've collected furniture from family and friends, donated furniture, and we are painting it according to the how-tos from the different colorist magazines Annie Sloan has produced, so that hopefully you can either follow along at home or be inspired to paint a piece, because we are going to have an auction in May where we auction off all the pieces painted on the season. Should be probably 12 pieces by the time we're done. This is one of the pieces. Now, we've gone from some very complicated, or not complicated, big pieces like a dresser or a small table that's painted in ombre, a small cabinet, to it can be very simple to do a simple little footstool. 4 legs, a top, nothing fancy to it at all, but one of those little pieces that's so useful in your house. And I always say when customers come in looking for paint, the hardest thing about painting is choosing a color. Well, you wouldn't believe how many times I deliberated what I was going to do with this little stool. It's so simple, so basic. You'd think it would be so simple and so basic to choose a color. Not when you have this many colors. There are so many colors. There's over 40 colors to choose from. So what I decided to do was go back to the colorist magazine, look at the how-tos, and what I chose was based on the stencil that was included in this magazine. Now, in one of our earlier shows, we did a stencil on a card table, very simple, where we did the original over the Versailles, very, very simple. But I really liked this little bird stencil. I'll put it here where you can see it a little more. Again, a very simple outline. And then there's a little leaf motif. And I thought maybe we could play with that. I was struck by the red wall. This color combination isn't necessarily one that would work in my house. So I thought, well, let me think a little bit outside of the box. How could I play with this? Because I really wanted to do something in the red. And I decided that what we would do is do the base in Emperor's Silk, do the bird in the yellow, and do the leaf motif in the green. We'll do the whole thing in red. We'll then stencil the bird in the center, and we're going to play with the leaf stencil by taping part of it off and create a wreath all the way around. So let's get started with the base coat. The easiest way to paint anything with legs is to flip it over. If you can do this, it makes it so much faster. And on this little stool, I am going to paint the underneath, because why not? For one thing, it has sort of a beveled edge that goes the opposite way, not the way you'd expect it to, but it goes the opposite way. So I am going to see this little edge. And I might as well just paint the whole thing. It'll only take a minute, and it looks a lot tidier. So I find when I'm doing something that has a turned leg, you don't want a lot of paint on your brush. You want to work just with the tips, and you just want to brush back and forth and work the paint into those little turned grooves. We're going to have to do 2 coats, just because it tends to need that when you're working on things that have little edges and turns like that. It's hard to get a thick coat on because you end up with too much paint. Just back and forth, working the paint in to where those little legs were turned. Hold on to another leg and work in your paint. Emperor's Silk is a funny color. When you look at it wet, you don't see red. You see a lot of pink. And you think, wow, that's not going to look like what I thought that is going to look like. But when it dries, it's quite a bit richer. And again, I had washed all of this, given it a good scrubbing. And probably when it's all finished, we will put little pads on the feet too, so that they don't scratch if you've got a laminate floor, because it is a useful little stool. Just got to tip it up here so I can put a little pressure on the brush. So as you can see, you're going to be good until you get to the very end and then have to figure out how you're going to hold on to a wet leg while you're painting the last one. And I am just going to do it by going as far as I can. Doesn't matter if you get paint on your hands, it comes right off. Get all the way around here. Now, I'm going to let it just tip on its leg. I can touch it up. Oops, a little more paint there. And again, with the round brush, I'm doing an all-over crosshatch sort of pattern. Okay, I'm going to flip this up. Make sure I've gone all the way around my backward bevel and get a quick coat on the top. Sometimes the most satisfying things to paint are the simple little projects. They're a great way to learn the paint if you don't want to commit to a great big dresser or a sideboard or kitchen cupboards. Practice your technique, practice with the brushes and the paint by doing a small piece. It's very satisfying to finish something. And a little project pot of paint will cover an awful lot of small projects. Don't always have to buy the big cans. There. So we're going to let that dry. We're going to come back. We'll probably have to do a second coat, and then we'll do some stenciling. Sometimes you're curious about something and you don't want to invest in it right away. And these brushes are an investment. They're all made in Italy. So whether you're buying, get organized here, wax brushes or paint brushes, which come in a variety of sizes, sometimes that's more of a commitment than you're ready to make. If you just want to try something, you can rent our brushes. We have brushes in all the sizes, brushes in dark wax and clear wax in both sizes. So instead of spending $42 on a brush, you can rent it for 3 days or a week, and your rental then goes towards the cost of the brush if you fall in love and you decide you need to have that in your craft kit. The rental is very straightforward. It's $5 for 3 days or $8 for a week. We just take a deposit and we give you back the deposit when you return the brush. Because the paint is all water soluble, we ask that you return the brushes clean and in good condition. But other than that, it's a great way to just kind of test drive one of Andy's brushes before you make a big commitment. So this dried, and we're going to put a second coat on it. You can see in here where you think you've got paint sometimes and you don't. So that's often why you need to do a second coat, and that second coat just picks up on those little bits. So same deal as before. Flip it over. Paint the underside, the legs or the feet as much as you can. I should mention too, we're painting at the store today because we've been working on, as we often do, filming 2 projects in one, or two shows in one video shoot. So there's a little bit of background going on here. And I don't have my at home with Cathy sign. It's at the store with Cathy, which we don't have a sign for. So, I want to make sure this time that I get right in there, and I don't want to have to do a third coat. Get right in there. So by going back and forth with the brush, working the bristles into the turned area on these legs. That's what makes this stool kind of cute. It's not just a straight leg stool. Okay, I'm going to turn it over and do the other end. for the other two legs. Paint over on its belly. Just finishes it up, makes it look nice. Turn it over here and finish these two legs. You have to be careful when you're painting too that you don't overpaint something that has started to dry, because if you do that, sometimes you will pick up the paint and remove it from your freshly painted. As it starts to dry, it gets a little bit sticky, and if you pick it up, you're just going to kind of scrape it off the freshly painted part. You're better to let it dry and go back and touch it up than you are to try and fix it. I find painting in the winter too, it's very dry. It's very dry in the store right now. And I do notice that this is drying extremely quickly, much faster than it would maybe normally in the summer when we have humidity. Go all the way around here. I can touch up my feet if I scrape them when I flip it over. Oh, I see a couple spots here I missed. Get my edges. And I just have to do the underneath here. And have a quick look and make sure that I got paint on everything I needed to. And then I'll do the top. Really, the top didn't need a second coat. It looked pretty good, but it is a footstool, and if it gets used as a footstool, or even if it gets used as a granddaughter's sitting spot, it will get used, so I'm better off to have a couple of coats of paint on it to give it a good protective finish. So we're going to finish this up, let it dry, and this time we want it to dry, well, we did let it dry last time really well too, but we want a good dry coat on it so that we can stencil without picking up any paint. So we're going to let this dry and we'll come back and do a little stenciling. We have 2 coats of paint on our cute little stool, and they're well dried now. So we're going to put a little bird stencil. Now I'm going to eyeball this. You could measure it and make sure you had it right in the center. And I'm going to use a little bit of painter's tape just to keep it in place. And I want the birds to be quite flat. So that looks to me to be roughly centered. And I've poured a little bit of Tilton Yellow out onto my mix mat. So I'm going to use the sponge roller, the small one. It comes in 2 sizes, whether you're doing a large or a small project. I want to work off some of the excess. If I have too much paint on my roller, when I roll it onto the bird stencil, it's going to go under the edge of it. So I want it to be kind of a dry finish. Just going to roller that. I'm going to roller it one way and then roller it the other. I might have to do this a couple of times because the yellow over the red is quite light. So I'll let that dry for a minute, and you can see it picked up some of the red too, just because my red paint is so fresh. So I'm going to, and I don't actually mind that. I don't mind if the bird's not completely bright red. He could be a blended bird. Go back over it. And while we're waiting for that to dry, we're going to start working on, I thought there's a little leaf motif, but I thought instead of going all the way around in a large pattern, what I might do is tape off 3 of the leaves so they don't get stenciled, and just work around using just this pattern all the way around. And we're going to work with Furl for that. Furl and Tilton are part of a special series of paint called the Charleston series that Annie has the rights to. And I'm just going to grab a piece of paper towel, and we'll do the other way of stenciling. So you can use a roller brush, which is one way, or you can use a stencil brush. A stencil brush is a very flat brush, cut off bristles, and again, you're working with a small amount of paint. Now here what I have to figure out is where is the edge of my stencil, because I want this to be roughly in the same place every time. So I'm going to have to just kind of guesstimate, work back. I'm just going to stencil. So when you're stenciling like this, you're just kind of dabbing. Again, I don't want the paint to go underneath the stencil, and if I have too much paint on my brush, I'm going to end up with smooshy instead of crisp outlines on my stencil. And again, that's entirely up to whatever makes you happy. If it's perfect, you probably don't want to do a stencil in the first place, because it's really hard to make paint do everything you want it to do every time. Oops, I don't want to lose my bird here. I need him to stay. So I'm just going to go around and create this little stencil, but I can't overlap it too much because that needs to dry. Stenciling dries so quickly, by the time I finish talking about it, I can almost go and do the next one. But I'm going to go over here instead, do this one. Again, just kind of estimate where it is. Pick up some paint, dab it off, come back and do that again. Just straight up and down. Nice crisp colors, the Furl, the Tilton yellow. Furl is the green, Tilton yellow, and the Emperor's silk. Again, I want to make sure I'm not picking up my bird stencil there. So I can go back over here, estimate where I am. And do a little bit. So we're going to continue to go all the way around the stool like this. And we'll come back in a few minutes and see what it looks like. So Sean the cameraman doubted that we were going to get that yellow quite as deep and dark as we did, but it did take 3 coats with the roller to work the depth of it. And actually there's tiny little bit of hint of red, but you know what, that's okay. Maybe there's a little bit of plumage there in this bird that's a little bit red instead of yellow. When this is good and dry, and it does need to dry, there are 3 coats of yellow on there under that stencil. We're going to clear wax it and make it into a sweet little stool for maybe one of our granddaughters to get up and down and help Grammy, or just a little place to put your feet or a place to put your coffee mug. But this, since I'm saying that, I might end up having to auction this and bid on it myself, because this is part of the auction that we're doing for Project Renew. So it's not going to be Gwenny's unless Gwenny's mother or Grammy buy it. But this is just a simple little project that you can do at home with a very little paint and a very little stool, or a very little anything you have. And the stencil came from the Colorist magazine. It's included in it. There's a stencil every month, but just something very simple and very effective. So thank you for joining me today, and we'll see you next week at Home with Cathy. There are 3 ways you can participate in our Renew project. 1, donate a piece for me to paint. Send me a picture though, I can't paint everything. And we're still looking for 4 or 5 pieces that we need to paint, and we will donate paint and donate them to the auction or to Chrysalis House. 2, you paint along with me. Come in and get some paint. We'll consult on colors. We'll give you a discount on your purchase. You paint along with me and donate your piece to the auction in May, and we'll make sure those funds go directly to Chrysalis House. Or 3, what if you don't want to paint or donate? You could donate cash. Project Renew is a building fundraiser for Chrysalis House. You can contact them directly to make arrangements on how to donate. Welcome to the project.